If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Logger Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Logger Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Logger Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
He has him open. Throws one up in the air. Smith caught it for the win. Oh! An improbable Summer League opening victory for the Houston Rockets. Wow.
Great call there from the ESPN broadcast. Of course, that was the final second of Houston's thrilling win on Friday's opening night of 2023 Summer League in Las Vegas. And spoiler alert, that's largely what we're going to be discussing today here at the Logger Line, your source for analysis and commentary of all things Houston Rockets basketball, served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager, developed in collaboration with the Houston Rockets, Carbach Brewing, that is, and with support from Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the team. As always, I'm your host, Ben DuBose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and a contributor to 790. And I'm joined by my good friend, producer, and co-host out of Portugal, Paulo Alves. You can follow me on Twitter at Ben DuBose, Paulo on there at Paulo Alves NBA. And look, we're recording this to peel back the curtain Saturday night. So we'll see what happens Sunday night when the Rockets resume Summer League play against the Pistons. They will not have Thompson, who looked very good in the opener, but then sprained his ankle in the final minute. Of course, that will take him out for the remainder of Summer League because it barely lasts more than a week in total. So we've seen what we will see from Amon, and who knows what the team will look like when they won't have their floor general, their engine out there. The Pistons do have a number of talented prospects, including Amon's twin brother, but also Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, James Wiseman. Who else is on that Pistons team? I'm forgetting, but they have a pretty strong summer roster, right?
Yeah, they do. I think you named off basically all of them.
Yeah, I thought there was somebody else that I'm missing, but the point is they have a lot of talented players, and so we'll see what happens. But even though it's just one game,
nobody's ever going to forgive you for who you forgot about.
Who was it?
Marcus Sasser.
Oh, there we go. Houston legend. I knew it because I was putting together for Rockets Wire the starting lineup an hour ago. And so I was looking through. And when I did the Pistons lineup, I was like, these are some damn big names. And it's unfortunate that the Rockets won't have their floor general out there. And so we'll see what guys like Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason and Cam Whitmore look like without an engine to really drive that offense. I'm sure Trevor Hudgens will step in at point guard. He's on a two-way, but of course he's not anywhere near the prospect or playmaker that Thompson is. So it's not all positive. They did lose Thompson, but I will say, by and large, it was such a feel-good night. And for me, above all else, it just reminded me of why the future is so bright for this organization and why, quite frankly, some of the little misgivings that we've had over the past week about how free agency played out and some of the things about not getting Brook Lopez and then the pivot to basically creating cap flexibility that you didn't fully need by offloading young players and second round picks to move them at the right time. And then you didn't get Lopez. You just got Van Fleet and Brooks without completing the trifecta of veteran targets. And there's been all this talk about asset management and could Rafael Stone have done better? Should he have done better? And I'm not going to say that anyone is wrong in their assessments. I think objectively the Rockets did not get a good return, even if I understand the reasons behind it and the process that led to that. But I also think the bigger takeaway, and Friday night really reminded me as to just how small those other debates are in the grand scheme. If the Rockets have prospects like Thompson, Jabari Smith Jr., and Tari Eason hit at a high level, that other stuff shouldn't matter at all. The Rockets have a core 6 in place, 2 top prospects from each of the last 3 draft classes, Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun in 2021, Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason in 2022, and Amon Thompson and Cam Whitmore this year, 2023. If even 2 or 3 of the prospects within that group hit at a high level, meaning, let's say, second or third best player on a contending team, you're going to be in an amazing place a few years from now. And that's even if none of them develop into a true alpha, an MVP contender, the type of guy who can be the best player on a championship team themselves. Even if you just get 2 or 3 really strong supporting pieces out of that group, then you can be the Miami to someone else's Damian Lillard in a few years if you need someone else to put this group over the top. And again, I'm not saying that guys like Amon or Jalen Green or Jabari can't develop into the lead guy themselves. They absolutely can. But the bottom line is, even if you just get a couple or 3 very, very good players out of these recent draft classes, you are going to be in an unbelievable spot when you combine that with the infrastructure that Houston has in place, as far as it being a fairly large market. Desirable free agents do generally want to be here. There are some institutional advantages that the Rockets have. And so when you see what happened Friday night, Amon Thompson just looked really in command on both ends of the floor. 16 points, 5 assists. I think he had 7 steals and blocks combined. He was really a two-way difference maker. Jabari Smith Jr., 29 points in the second half, including that buzzer-beating 3 in the final 0.6 seconds, which was just absurd. Tari Eason with another efficient 20 points and 10 boards, shot 50% overall, 50% from 3. Cam Whitmore, even though he didn't shoot well, the tunnel vision's a problem. He still had a double, and he showed a lot of promise in terms of his athleticism and his ability to make plays. I mean, it's at this point, it's sort of like a bull in a china shop, but you can see the talent, you can see the power, the explosion, the elite athleticism. When you see guys like that execute, and I know it's summer league, but that was a quality team they went up against. There's a reason why it was nationally televised on ESPN. The Blazers had Scoot Henderson, who played very well before he left early with an injury of his own to his shoulder. They also had Shaedon Sharpe, who, like Jabari Smith, was a top pick in the 2022 draft. They also had a couple of other quality players that were from their NBA team a year ago. So again, this was high profile. There was lots of talent on that stage, and to see the Rockets succeed with the young guys, it was just really, really refreshing. And to me, it just hit home how small some of these things, at least on social media, that we've been debating really are. If these guys hit at a high level, that other stuff isn't going to matter at all. To me, that was what I came out of Friday night feeling, that, you know, it's not so much that anybody is right or wrong with the other stuff, but it's just a reminder that if they were right with these guys they drafted, like Amon, like Jabari, like Tari, that ultimately the other stuff isn't even going to matter, right?
I think a lot plays into it, right? I think the fact that we haven't watched basketball besides yesterday for a while, the fact that everybody knows how important this free agency is, and the fact that so much is happening at the same time, so much change, makes it so people are just focused on this, right? And people are going to overanalyze this. And I mean, the truth of the matter is, the Rockets made a couple of bad trades, objectively bad trades, essentially, you know, burning assets away, small assets, but burning assets away. Which is incorrect, and the process is awful. And I understand why people are triggered about it, because usually in a trade, even if it's a bad trade, there's some sort of upside to both sides. There's no positive outlook to look at the trades, the 2 trades, the Atlanta trade and the Patty Mills trade that the Rockets made, right? And because of that, people are really focusing on that, and I can't blame them. But what I can do is say that 2 things can be true at the same time. That process-wise, those were 2 awful trades that we know were justified. One of them by the fact that the Rockets thought they had a commitment from Brook Lopez, and the other one from the fact that both that and they valued Jason Tate over Patty Mills and two second-round picks, because that's the option that they had. They either included Jason Tate in the sign and trade deal with Dillon Brooks, or they did what they did, which is take on Patty Mills for 1 second and then add his salary to the trade instead of Tate's, in order to make the salary matching work. And they spent 3 seconds doing that. So a net of 2 seconds. So that's the decision that they made. Do I agree with it? Probably not. But I don't agree with a lot of the decisions that they made personnel wise. But I understand. I'm not the coach, and if Ime thinks that Tate may have a role in this team that's worth more than 2 second-round picks, then we've got to believe him, and we'll judge him. But when this team's on the floor and we see how much Tate contributes, right? Ultimately, as I said, it is objectively correct that they got bad value in those trades. It's also objectively correct that in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal. I had an analogy about it earlier, which is, listen, what the Rockets lost is they lost some disposable assets, right? The core is still the core; it's still there. They just lost a lot of the things that they would easily give up if they needed to tweak something with the team, right? If they're targeting a player that's not worth a Brooklyn first-round pick right now, then it's tough for them to make that deal because they don't really have a lot of assets smaller than that to make that trade happen. Unless they make the Brooklyn pick protected or something like that. There are some ways to achieve that, but it's generally tougher. If they want to make a deal right now, it likely will involve a core piece or a really valuable pick or a pick of their own, which is always a risk, as we are about to find out this season. So that's what they lost. Right, but at the same time, they got two vet free agents that they wanted. They still have the core six, and they nailed the head coaching hire, and they nailed the draft. And going forward, it's as we've talked about this. I'm not going to go too long into it. As we said in the last podcast, listen, now it's about how well can they play, how can they answer the questions that everybody's asking. If they come in and they kick ass and they make the play, and nobody's going to be thinking about this. Or some people will, because agendas are always a thing, but for the most part, nobody will be talking about it. If they don't, then it will look a lot uglier in a year from now, because they'll likely be looking to make some move around the margins, and to do so, they'll have to give up someone that they don't want to give up, which means either they will have to protect a pick, or they'll have to aim to a target that's more expensive than they originally wanted. Regardless, it's bad process, but as I said, not that big of a deal. But to move on to what we actually want to talk about, which is yesterday's game.
By the way, I do want to read off a tweet from our friend Beam a Thug on Twitter. Of course, he's David Weiner in real life, but the analogy that he made that I thought was perfect for it was, let's say your friend gets a $50,000 bonus, but then they light $500 on fire. You can both be mad about lighting the $500 on fire and also realize that it pales in comparison to the $50,000 that he brought in. And that's basically where we are with this situation. I think there's so much of a focus on social media that it can be easy to lose context. And the important context is that when it comes to what actually matters in terms of will this rebuild be a success and can the Rockets get back in a few years to a championship contending level, the signs are still really promising, even if the Rockets squander that $500.
Yeah, and I guess I'll take that to say something really quick, which is, I think a lot of people in the current climate of Houston Rockets discussion think that you're either a doomer or you're a cheerleader. And there's a place to be somewhere in between, which is what I think I am at and what I think Ben's at, which is, hey, stuff went wrong, some stuff went wrong, but overall the picture is still promising, and so we're not gonna, spend too much time going on what went wrong, because there's a lot of things that went right, and that's what's going to impact the future. I think that, at least personally, I try to provide unbiased analysis on the podcast, especially. But at the same time, I do realize that I'm a fan, and in order to be a fan, you have to kind of, if you're not optimistic and if you don't have faith in the team's direction moving forward, at least to some extent, right? If you don't see some ways out, even if you think that the situation is terrible, then why are you're just going to lose interest, right? And it's not going to be as enjoyable. So yes, I'll overrate Rockets players from time to time. That's natural. It's being a fan. Even when I'm trying to be an analyst and put that stuff aside, sometimes it happens. Doesn't mean that I'm doing it all the time, and doesn't mean that all of my opinions are biased in that scenario. So as I get into looking at what last night's game looked like, hey, I was someone who was lower than most on A-Man Thompson as the draft process was happening, because I had this idea that I hope that they could, either Scoot Henderson falls or they could trade up for him. And to my credit, he showed everything that everybody expected him to show yesterday. He's just a shout out to Scoot Henderson and Blazers fans. I'm really excited for their young core. I'm kind of jealous that they get to start off their rebuild with two pieces like Scoot Henderson and Shaden Sharp. We had to watch John Wall and Victor Oladipo for like an entire season, which was pretty tough. But he was everything everyone expected of him. And at the same time, while he had all the hype, I don't think Amen Thompson had a worse game than he did. And I think a few things were kind of stood out to me as I was watching the game. First one is Amen Thompson's a huge guy. Like, he's massive. He's every bit of 6'7". If you go and you watch the game, he looks like a wing. He doesn't look all that smaller from just the centers on the floor. It's not one of those situations where, I'm 6'6", but in reality you're like 6'4", right? But you're like a shooting guard or something, and then people want to say you're 6'6". He's huge, which is good. His wingspan's huge. So that's my first point. My second point is defensively first, which I'll talk about defensively first. He got blown by Scoot in the play early in the game. And it kind of woke him up a little bit, because right after that, he had two sequences where he was just clamping him up. And Amen Thompson's known for playing up in guys' faces, and early in the game, he wasn't doing it. And then as time moved on, he eventually started doing it. And I think it's good to have a guy at a guard position that does that, especially if he's a high draft pick, supposed to be a leader. I think that was a huge deal. I was impressed by the way he navigated screens. I'm not going to say he's, incredible, but he has, he is good at making himself look skinny and getting through screens. And even when he does get caught on a screen, he's so quick and so lengthy that he recovers fairly fast. There were multiple instances when he got screened off of the main ball handler, and the team even switched that action, and he managed to recover and get back to the guy in time. A lot of times, Scoot Henderson, and get back to the guy in time to contest his shot or to switch the action back. Right. So I was really encouraged by his defense. He did have, which I think is crazy for a guard, he had 4 blocks and 3 assists and 3 steals. I mean, 7 stocks in 28 minutes in a game is insane. And bodes well for the role that he will eventually play for the Rockets, at least year one, where he's coming off the bench and having those extra things. Those are the things that are going to keep you on the floor, even if the offense isn't going the way you want it to. And I'll pass it off to you to talk about the offense. The last thing I'll mention is, I think there's one play, the play right before he twisted his ankle. That was absolutely insane to me. So he's basically in the dunker spot, right? And the opposing team center, I'm not sure if it was Badji or the other guy that I don't remember the name of, was going up for a dunk, and Amen Thompson is in the dunker spot at a standstill, like that. There's no run up to it, and he just jumps straight vertical, and he blocks what has got to be at least 6'11" or 7 foot. Your point guard just pure vertical block a center at the rim. That's not normal.
No, it's not. And I remember that play.
Like, that was pretty insane to me. I was looking at it and was like, dude, see, that's probably better rim protection than we've had in the last 3 years. Like,
right.
Like, we had Christian Wood there, and in that same position, Christian Wood's not only is not getting that block, he's either getting dunked on or dunking out of the way. And sorry for the Christian Wood slander, but I thought he was really impressive defensively at the very least.
Yeah, and I think where he stood out to me, and honestly, it was on both ends of the court, is just how incredibly high his basketball IQ and his awareness is. And that's something that has been an issue for, honestly, most of the young prospects the Rockets have had on the roster the last couple of years. To see the level of awareness that Amen already has, one of the big questions going into this was about the transition from OTE to the NBA. That didn't seem like it was much of an issue at all. Granted, it's summer league, but it was definitely NBA caliber talent that was out there. And you could tell on both ends of the court, he was often several steps ahead in terms of figuring out what was coming next. He didn't check out when he was off the ball the way we've seen a lot of young players do the past couple of years. That's defensively. Offensively, the 5 assists don't do it justice. He had so many hockey assists. I think back to the one play early in the game where he hit at cutting Cam Whitmore through just a microscopic hole, and then Whitmore kicked it back to the top to Jay Huff, the big guy who hit a three. He was just in command on both ends, and it just seemed like that he was just a few seconds ahead at all times, which, number one, it's important to have the IQ to be able to do that. And then secondly, it's important to have the willingness to stay in that mindset even when you don't have the ball yourself or if you're not guarding the ball on defense. So I thought he showed a lot of poise, a lot of maturity, and I think it's such a good fit because a lot of the young guys, other than Tari Eason, when we talk about this core, a lot of them really need the ball in their hands to be successful. They need to go out and score and shoot at a high level. And Jalen has done that. Jabari can do that. We saw that at times late last season, and he certainly did last night. We hope that Jabari's defense comes along to what it was expected to be during the pre-draft process. But the bottom line is a lot of the young guys they have, Jalen, Jabari, Kim Whitmore is clearly in this group as well. At least at this point in their careers, they need to be optimized a certain way to extract their value. And Şengün is in that grouping as well, even though, Şengün is more of a playmaker. Still, there's certain ways, and we've talked about this in the past, that you have to use Alperen Şengün in order to unlock the most of his value. Where I think guys like Amin and Tari Eason have so much value is that even when the ball isn't in their hands all the time, and I thought it was interesting last night offensively, there were a lot of sets where the Rockets actually initiated their actions with either Tari or Jabari bringing the ball up the floor and having at least initially Amin off the ball. And they would try to give him a better angle on a screen, coming around a curl, something like that. Maybe that's getting ready for the way they run offense during the season with Alperen Şengün. I don't know. But the point is, there's a lot of different ways when you have the overall skill set and the IQ that guys like Amin and to an extent Tari as well have, then that's really important because, again, you're trying to blend this puzzle together. And I think the Rockets the last couple of years have generally had players that all needed to be utilized in a certain way for them to have positive value. And I think it also led to a ton of peaks and valleys, and that, if Jalen and or Alp have a bad night, then it's going to be bad for the offense because what else are they going to provide value with? There's only certain ways at this point in their careers and with the team that young that they can be used, as opposed to, again, guys like Amin and Tari. What I thought was so refreshing is that even when the ball wasn't in their hands, even if they weren't scoring themselves or creating, be it what they're doing off the ball, be it their value defensively, just the overall approach that they have, it's so important because in terms of building out the puzzle and putting this together, now it feels like you have multiple guys who have the utility to be used and provide value in a lot of different ways. And so that's not, again, that's not necessarily to talk down on guys like Jalen and Şengün, because let's be clear, Amin does still have a question with the jump shot. He did make the only three-pointer he took late in the game, which I thought was a good sign.
I was about to say, you cannot say that. He's shooting 100% from three at the Rocket.
Yeah, but no, you know where I'm going with that. There are questions about can he score at a dynamic enough level to be, the 30-plus points per game alpha on a contender, the way we know Jalen potentially can be. Not saying he is, but we know that he has that talent. It's just a matter of whether he puts it all together. With Amin, there's a more diverse skill set, but in terms of the high-end scoring and the shooting, there are questions regarding if he can get there. So it's not like Amin is just clearly a better prospect than these other guys. No, I mean, they have their strengths as well. But I just think that, as with anything, you need a balance. And the fact that you have guys like Amin and Tari that can provide value in so many different ways, even if it's not them scoring, even if it's not just their on-ball defense, then to me, that's going to make for a much healthier mix than the last couple of years when so many of your prospects have to be used in one specific way to really maximize their value. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'll take that and I'll flip it around and I'll talk about how impressed I was about him offensively. And I'm sorry, I'm just talking about Amin so far, but I was really impressed, right? You talked about his assists, right? So you talked about the one to Cam Whitmore. There were some that happened, and usually, so the Rockets have been so bad playmaking wise for the past 3 years, at least the guards. And no insult to KPJ, as I said, I think he'll be great this year. but I'm used to watching the game and be screaming at my television, "This pass is open, please make it," and it's not happening. So with Amen, what happened was I was not seeing the passes, and he was making them anyways. He was making reads on the floor that I, as a spectator looking at the floor, did not see. One of them was actually similarly to the clip the Rockets shared of practice a couple of days ago. He had an assist to Jabari, not at the dunker spot, but really close to it. That he just whipped the ball to him on the inside. And I was like, I didn't even see that was an opening. And he not only so Jabari wasn't wide open, but he saw that he was close enough to the rim that he likely could make something happen, and he was in a position of strength offensively, right? It wasn't something obvious, but he saw it, and Jabari capitalized on it because he made the read quickly enough. There was another one that I was really impressed by, which was I think he missed a turnaround jump shot, if I'm not mistaken. I think this is the sequence. He grabbed the rebound, or someone grabbed the rebound and gave it back to him, and he drove, and he got under the basket, and while he's under the basket, he it's kind of like a dump off pass, but not really. And he wraps his arm around and makes a pass from under the basket to Tari Eason.
Yep.
And to me, I didn't see that pass either. And it was open, but it wasn't that open. And I think if you look at any player on the Rockets this year, or the past 2 years, by the way,
that was a nice slip and cut by Tari Eason to get back to the point that I was trying to make in terms of providing value in other ways.
It was exactly, and it just surprised me because the last couple of years, in that situation, everybody's going up and trying to finish that at the basket, and Amen saw it, early enough to adapt and go under the basket and do that wraparound pass that I was really impressed by. He also had a kick out to the corner to Jabari, not to Cam Whitmore, in which he didn't make the shot. But I was really impressed by. I was really impressed with his ability to see the pass and his ability to execute the pass on to the correct spot and quickly enough. And I think that bodes really well going forward. Another thing that I was really happy with him was he had, I think it's his first bucket of the game, if I'm not mistaken, which is a floater, which is a massive deal. If he can knock down floaters consistently, then the need for a jump shot decreases substantially because now you can play as far back. And I'll get into a little bit of why I don't think they can anyway, but you won't be able to play as far back in the pick and roll. You'll have to respect it, and it's basically like having a jump shot. I mean, the floater was pretty far out. I think if you extended the free throw line to where he was at, it's basically the same distance. So I was really happy to see that. His touch is something that's going to be really important going forward. And speaking of his touch, he had a lot of tough finishes around the rim, and he does get a lot of hang time, so he gets a little bit more margin than most players. But he was finishing stuff that I don't think. I mean, that Kevin certainly wasn't finishing his rookie season. We have, once again, you'll notice that the things I'm noticing are things that the Rockets kind of lack in those departments. Because another thing that we're not that good at as a team is finishing at the rim. Rushengun gets a lot of offensive rebounds that he can't, make the bunny afterwards. Tarisan does the same thing. Jalen Green's gotten better at it, but he's still somewhat of doesn't have a lot of English in his finishes. It either goes really well or terribly wrong. KPK was really good at it the first season he was here, but then the last couple of seasons his shooting got better, but his finishing has kind of fallen off. So I was really impressed by that, and it's good because he was finishing, I would say, not really like a guard, but more like a wing, like the same way Jason Tatum finishes at the rim, which is not getting to the actual rim, but being really good at bouncing the ball off the backboard and knowing the angles to make it go in and make it go over shot blockers' heads. So that was another thing that was really encouraging for me. And to tie into it, the last thing I'll touch on offensively for a man is there were a couple of times this game where teams were giving him a little bit of a runway, and he wasn't pulling up for the floater like he did early on, and he was trying to kind of go around people, and that's what showed his finishing, right? But I think as he goes forward in his career, he'll have to learn to go through people because he's big enough, and he'll draw a lot of fouls that way. And I'm not sure if he's confident. Maybe he's not confident in his free throw shooting. He did shoot 3 or 4, which is, if he can shoot 75% for his career, that's great. I think that's something that he'll have to work on, which is not going around the defender, but going through the defender when he gets ahead of steam, because that's the way Giannis gets to the rim a lot. And that's a lot of the difference between a guy like Ben Simmons and a guy like Giannis, who both are incredibly athletic and both can go through people, but one chooses not to, and the other one just does it all the time. So that's kind of, I think that's the last thing that I have on Amen.
Yeah, the one slight criticism I had, I thought at the rim, he showed nice touch from time to time, especially in the first half with his finishing. I think he needs to trust that more. I think a couple of times that he didn't finish at the rim were when he just tried to go right over people. And I think that's where there can be a big jump between OTE and the NBA, is that the bigs here, they're both A, more athletic, and B, the technique is better. They're more able to go vertical without fouling. I think in OTE, either you can just directly shoot or dunk over somebody, or B, they're so undisciplined, there's a good chance that you're going to get a foul simply because you're in the advantaged position. As opposed to the NBA, they're a bit more disciplined. So I think it's something that again, I'm not worried about it, because I think in time, he clearly has the touch. So as he learns from this, I think he's going to learn to trust that touch a bit more and be a bit more savvy when he goes up near the bucket and, try and go at it from an angle. Even if you've got to spin it, well, then that's what you've got to do. If the defender is just going to go up and basically stay vertical and prevent you from just going strictly above them. But that's just little things. Overall, it was a wildly encouraging debut, and I know it's all we'll see before training camp. But look, I don't think we need to see anything more. He showed why he was a top 4 pick, why the Rockets believed in him enough to where they didn't want to trade up for Scoot Henderson, even though they had a need at that position. And even though Scoot looked very good in his own right, I thought Amon held his own and then some, and justified why the Rockets really believe in him so much as a building block. And it's going to be interesting to see how quickly he can force his way into the conversation for a starting slot. Because when you combine his gifts as a playmaker and everything that he can provide with his length defensively and the high IQ that he plays with, it's going to be tough to keep his minutes down. I think with Cam Whitmore, again, I mentioned earlier, the talent is there, but you can see, and he did just turn 19 years old today. Happy birthday, by the way. You can see with Cam, it's going to be a process. Again, I think that's part of why the Rockets settled on Amon and not Cam for that number 4 overall pick. With Amon, because he's so advanced in terms of his processing on both ends of the floor, you combine that with the athletic gifts, and he's going to be making a push, in my opinion, sooner rather than later for more playing time, especially if that 100% mark from three-point range proves accurate, which I know, small sample, but it's a scientific fact. He's 100% on three-pointers in the NBA, and it's going to remain that way until at least October, which is when the Rockets begin their preseason slate. And thankfully, even though a grade 2 ankle sprain is not great, look, the one silver lining that I'll take, at least the NBA calendar is back to normal. So with the injury occurring on July 7th, he can basically do nothing for 2 months if that's what the Rockets think he needs to do. And he can start gearing up in early September and still have plenty of time to get right before training camp, which doesn't start until the very last couple of days of September this year. So with the NBA calendar back to what it was pre-COVID, then he's got all the time in the world effectively to make sure that ankle sprain is behind him and that it's not a nagging situation like what we saw. The Christian Wood thing is an example that I think a lot of Rockets fans always think about from that 2021 season, when he sprained that ankle in early February and he tried to come back in about 4 to 6 weeks after, but he kept re-aggravating it several times over the remainder of that season, and it never really got ready until the off season, never got back to full health. That should not be the case here. Again, this happened early enough that even though grade 2 sprain, it's not great. Look, my guess is the Rockets and rookie walls are not an unfamiliar concept at all. My guess is they were already going to sort of load manage him a bit during this offseason to get ready for the grind of 7 to 8 straight months of NBA basketball. So I think ultimately it's not great, but it's something that by the time the Rockets report to camp in late September, it should be behind him and he should be 100%. So from a timing perspective, he should be all systems go. And again, so far, so good. There's a reason why the Rockets believe in him to the extent that they do. As far as the other takeaways, look, we played that Jabari Smith Jr. shot off the top, and it almost feels like we're burying the lead because he scored a game-high 33 points, including a buzzer beater, because we haven't really gone into greater depth since we started this episode 30-plus minutes ago. But boy, what an encouraging second half it was. I know as a second-year player, it's sort of like when Keegan Murray scored 39 a couple of nights before that in the Sacramento Summer League. You sort of expect a second-year player who was drafted highly to have that gear. But look, we know the rookie season was not great for Jabari, and the first half, let's be honest, was not great for him either. Had just 4 points, didn't shoot the ball well. So to see him be able to flip the switch, and it wasn't like he just made more shots, that's part of it, but he also got to the line 17 times. He was uber aggressive, and the Rockets, every time I've talked to them, they've consistently pointed out, and they're right about this, that some of the issues that we talk about with regards to, his lack of shot creation, how much wiggle does he have as a creator? Look, when you're almost 7 feet tall, and he said before the game last night that he's 6'11", he's still growing. It's like Kevin Durant. You don't have to have the most sophisticated handle to get a good look. You just need to rise and fire, especially if you have a quick release, which he does, to just simply go straight over guys. And you're also going to draw a lot of fouls when you do that, because a lot of guys aren't prepared for you to shoot at a given moment. And so many times they're going to react a bit surprised and get a bit too handsy because you catch them off guard. I think beyond just the fact that more shots went in, to see him play with that level of aggression, to see him get to the line that much, it was just a really, really good sign after. I know he finished his rookie season a lot better than he started, but by and large, it was still underwhelming for number 3 overall pick that many people expected to go number 1 going into the draft. So I just think, even though he'll say he's a confidence guy, on some level, it had to be great to see him get the payoff, right?
Yeah, I think Ime Udoka made, so as the game was going on, Ime Udoka had a little segment with the announcers, not the announcers, the booth, the broadcast booth. And he said something about Jabari, who at the time wasn't having the best of games, which was, he was talking about how Jabari plays too upright. And often, because of that, when he gets the ball, he's not ready to shoot. So it takes him a little extra second. And he's not ready to drive or anything like that, because if he comes indecisive because of that. And I thought that was a really interesting point, because we've been trying to understand what's going on with his jump shot. Some people say it's not enough legs. Some people say it's too flat or whatever it is. And it might just be this, that he's not ready to shoot when he catches the ball. And that's why it's inconsistent and the shot doesn't work the same every single time. It depends on how close he is to that shooting form and how ready he is. And he said this, and then second half came around and he absolutely kicked ass. So I don't know. I think with Jabari, right, in the first half, I let a tweet out of frustration saying, listen, if this first half is any indication of how him and Tari stack up, then Tari should probably start. And if there is a meritocracy, Tari will probably start. And then second half came around and Tari remained awesome, make no mistake about it, but Jabari, really took. I think getting to the line 17 times is crazy. I think the refs were a little bit quick on the trigger with the whistle. I'm not sure he drew a lot of those fouls. And some of them were just, late in the game. He was the guy getting fouled, and he made those free throws when the pressure was on. He missed some early on, but when the pressure was on, he made all of them. So maybe that helps him. I don't know. But he looked really awesome, and that game winner, to me, well, before the game winner, I also want to talk about his defense and how he may or may not project to being a small ball 5. Before the game winner, the play that forces the game winner, the lob that's broken up, the ball goes over him, and it's kind of a situation like, how, that play that was really popular of Giannis stopping I think it's a Chris Paul or a Devin Booker lob to DeAndre Ayton, where he stops the ball handler, he throws the lob, and he's quick enough and uses his length and blocks the finish at the rim anyways. So this play happens, right? And I'm thinking, Jabari just did the exact same thing. He met the guy, or he pressured the ball handler, and he threw the lob, and he turned around and he blocked it at the rim. And to me, that's encouraging, because that's a play that not a lot of centers make. And if he can combine plays like that with his abilities to switch onto the perimeter, I think it's just really encouraging in general, especially because if Amen Thompson is a big part of your future, I think he can play with a non-spacing big, and I think he'll do fine with Sengun. He did fine with Bayhuff in this game. He's smart enough of a passer that I think he can, thread the needle if need be. But I think eventually, if you want to maximize him, you're going to eventually need a floor spacing big. And if that floor spacing 5 happens to be Jabari Smith, then all the better, because you don't have to trade for one, and you can run a lot of sweet schemes if Jabari can be good enough of a rim defender. So, and then besides Jabari, he had obviously the game winner, which is crazy. I think, how are you gonna go 2 of 7 from 3, and then to jump to 38%, which is 3 of 8, that's the shot you make. I thought it was really interesting that something else that happened before that play was Ben Sullivan, the Rockets head coach in Summer League, was pissed at the referees when they told him that he wasn't going to get to advance the ball after the timeout.
Oh yeah.
And he drew up that play. I think that's what he drew up, right? I think the Tari at the end of the game said he told him he's going to need his quarterback skills, and I was like, wait, was this planned? Like, did they intentionally throw a massive lob just because Jabari is the tallest guy on the floor and he happens to be our best shooter, and so that's going to be our best shot at doing it? I don't know if it was intentional, but it was hilarious that it happened that way. And I'm happy for Jabari because he needs moments like this. And he had a game winner at the end of the season last year. But he needs moments like this, because if it is a confidence issue, then this does wonders for him. And before that, I think talking a little bit about Cam Whitmore, the tunnel vision issues are real, right? There are a little bit of handle issues and a little bit of, maybe a little bit too much overconfidence with some of the shots that he took. But this is Summer League, right? I'm fine with him taking those shots as long as when he actually plays for the team and we're trying to win games, he knows his role. But I think Stanford KP on Twitter had a good point. He really reminds you of Jaylen Brown early in his career. I don't know if you see that, but I definitely see it. And if it's the same thing, that he'll need a few years to develop into what eventually is a scoring option. He tries to go through, perhaps contrary to a man, he tries to go through people too much, right? He relies on
physicality a bit too much.
Yeah, he's too happy going through people. He needs to look around, see. Usually, if there's a lot of people on you and you're struggling, it means someone's open. But it was encouraging. I don't think he'll get minutes this year, but it'll be it'll give us an incentive to watch the T League at least. And okay, there's 2 more guys, and I wasn't going to talk about Jay Huff, but I gotta. I was impressed by him. He is a 7-foot shot blocker. He wasn't afraid of getting dunked on. He got 4 blocks. He fumbled an Amen Thompson pass on the pick and roll, which it's not great, but it's fine. I think with the Rockets having 3 two-way spots this year, I think one of them should definitely be him. Because they've got Shingun and Jock Landale, and I think they're considering Jeff Green their third big or their third center, which would be a small ball option. I think it would make sense to get a guy like him on a two-way deal if they can. And then lastly, I think we've got to talk about Tyrese, and I think he was the most consistent player on the floor from the beginning to the end of the game. He's still an absolute menace on the boards. He's still an absolute menace defending guys. He had 4 blocks as a 6'8" forward, which is pretty insane. There was a line from one of the commentators that I'm trying to find it, but I think I'll just have to remember it, by heart, which is I found it. He said Tari just finds a way. And I think that perfectly encapsulates everything that Tari is. He finds a way. The ball finds its way to him on the offensive boards. He just finds the ball when he's guarding people. He finds the ball blocking shots. Something that I was impressed by him, he had 5 assists to only 2 turnovers, and he wasn't really on ball creating. This was just him making the correct read quickly enough and generating an open shot from it, which is the next step. Right, we've talked about earlier when we were talking about the Denver Nuggets and their role players. You can be a 3-and-D wing, you can be just a shooter, you can just be a defender, you can be a 3-and-D wing, and eventually, if you progress enough, you become a 3-and-D plus, which is a 3-and-D wing. You can defend, you can shoot, but you're also good at making the correct decisions when the ball finds its way to you, whether that is attack, shoot, or pass the ball to the open man in a quick manner, right? And I was really impressed by him. He had 20, 10, and 5 with 4 blocks. Incredible game by him, and Ime Udoka is just going to love this guy, and I would be really surprised if he doesn't get, at the very least, 25 minutes a game.
Yeah, I think he will too. And ultimately, some of the stuff, when it comes down to who starts and who doesn't, that's what training camp is for. Look, we all know there's certain players that need the ball more to be successful. Certainly, Alfred Şengün is one of those guys. And when you look at Jabari Smith and Tari Eason, look, I think at least for now, shot creation is more of the profile for Jabari Smith Jr. When he's at his best, you need to let him at least shoot the ball more. I think for him, shooting and shot creation could be a bit of one and the same. And it just depends. We'll see who the other starters are. I suspect Dylan Brooks, who you just paid him $80 million, mostly guaranteed. So my guess is that he is in the starting lineup and he's someone that doesn't need a ton of shots. Now, he may want some shots, but I think ideally Ime would be able to hold those down. So perhaps that gives you a little more runway to start someone like a Jabari Smith Jr. next to him. Of course, if he's starting on the front line next to Alperen Şengün, then that's another factor to consider. But look, the bottom line is they have different skill sets. And as far as who starts, that's what training camp is for. And ultimately, it can also vary. Not saying you need to switch up your starting lineup every game, but if you think you need a certain combination on a certain night, then you can pull somebody at the 8-9 minute mark of the second quarter and try to stagger the minutes appropriately and just sort of mix and match who makes the most sense. The bottom line is the Rockets have the most options, and that's why you bring in a qualified head coach, which Ime Udoka is, to try and sort that out. So I don't see it as a problem at all in terms of, these guys are both playing well. Who starts, who doesn't? No, I mean, you take it as a bonus. And ultimately, I think there's a path for them both to play 25 plus minutes per game. And as far as what groupings those 25 minutes are with, we can sort that out later and see what happens in training camp. I think that's pretty much everything I had from Summer League. Is there anything else that you wanted to add in before we move on to some of our other topics?
Yeah, I have to say, I hope that they keep Jabari and Tari. I hope they keep Jabari and Tari playing the next couple of games. Otherwise, it's gonna be the Cam Whitmore show for 3 games in a row, and that's gonna be tough to watch. But I also wanted to mention the quote. I think it was Kelly Iko who asked the question, and Jabari said, it was about why he was playing in the G League. So he said, I'm 20 years on why he's playing in the Summer League, right? And he said, I'm 20 years old. Why wouldn't I play? We were 22 and 60 last year. My rookie year wasn't perfect, so why not get out here and get reps, play with my new teammates and coaches? And I think this is an amazing mindset to have. Like, the Rockets were the third worst team in the league, tied for second worst team in the league. This is the mindset that guys have to have. They have earned nothing. They're not above anything. And I'm not blaming Dylan for not playing. He's a year 3 guy. That's even, going to his year 3, that's even more remote of a possibility. But I really like the mindset that Jabari had, that he's coming in, he's going to play, he knows he needs to get better, and credit to him for approaching it so professionally and being so honest with himself.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, now as we wind down, a couple other topics we want to get to. The NBA, within the past hour of our recording, has released the groupings for its in-season tournament. That's basically what the NBA is trying to turn into, I suppose, the US version, the NBA version of the FA Cup, the League Cup, some of your in-season tournaments that you see a lot more in European football, where in this case, it will actually still be, other than the championship game, a part of the regular season. You'll just be leveraging certain results to eventually get to a knockout stage, including the Final Four that will be in Las Vegas in early December. And the idea, I've had so many people ask why. Look, the NBA has a lot of inventory to sell. And we've seen from time to time that there can be a certain point in the regular season early on. There's a lot of people who brag about, for example, that they don't start following the NBA until Christmas. Well, that's not great for the league in terms of maximizing its earning power with that inventory that they already have. So this is a way to get people more involved and give more teams the opportunity to have success. And maybe this is the type of thing that a young team like the Rockets will value more, as opposed to some teams may say, this is just one of 82. Maybe the Rockets do go extra hard for these games because it's something that, as a relatively young group, they feel like, hey, we're probably not going to be able to contend for a championship next season, but maybe we can make a push with this. Now, the downside, they do have a pretty tough group. The way it works, each conference has 3 groups of 5, basically like divisions, but it's not divisions. In this case, it's new groupings. The Rockets have the Nuggets, the Clippers, the Pelicans, and the Mavericks. On paper, all of those teams profile to be better than the Rockets based on their rosters at this current moment. So Houston's decidedly an underdog, but who knows? If the Rockets really prioritize these games and it's a small sample, some things go their way, crazier things have happened. And the way it's going to work is that from the 30 teams, you're going to have 8 advance to the knockout stage, the winners of each of the 3 groups, and 1 wild card, basically the best record amongst the second place teams in each of those groups within the conference. And so the Rockets are underdogs going in. But look, I'm looking forward to it. To me, it's something that, again, the NBA does need some extra juice from time to time to get through 82 games. There's increasing competition, not just from other sports, but entertainment at large. And if it doesn't work, there's no harm in trying and failing. You can always go back to just the standard 82 games. But this is trying to add a little bit of juice, a little bit more incentive for younger teams, give more fan bases hope, give more people a reason to care. I see only positives. I don't have a ton of optimism about the games within that group as far as the Rockets versus the Nuggets, the defending champions, of course, the Clippers, the Pelicans, the Mavericks. On paper, those are all very good teams who are ahead of the Rockets. But again, there's a reason they play the games. It's a small sample. I don't see any negatives. I only see potential positives. So in general, I'm a fan of the concept, and we'll see what happens as far as the Rockets when these games actually start in October and November.
Yeah, so you said the first place of each group goes on, and then the best second place is also going through?
The best second place from the rest of the conference. Yeah. So basically 4 teams will advance to the knockout stage, the 3 group winners, and then the best of whatever is left. Basically, everybody else at that point would get thrown into how many teams would be left? 12. So yeah, you'd have to be the best of the 12 non-group winners.
What? Listen, this happens every time. Y'all know I'm from Portugal, so we have the World Cup and we have the Euros, and Portugal always gets the group of death. We had Germany and France like 2 editions in a row. Then we got the group of death again. I mean, in a competition where only the first place is guaranteed to go through, we got the best team in the league within the Denver Nuggets. And even if if you look at the rest of the group fighting for the best second, ours easily has the best depth. I mean, Dallas, the Clippers, especially if they get Harden back, if they get Harden at all, and the Pelicans are all teams that are going to be fighting at the very least for the play and probably for the playoffs. And in any other team, I mean, when Group C has OKC, the Spurs, and the Wolves, who are all, I'm not going to say they're all garbage, and then they got Group A as the Blazers, who are going to be tanking because they're trading Damian Lillard, and the Jazz, who are, they didn't tank last year, but they'll probably will this year. So they're not great. I don't get it. Why do we always get the worst group? That being said, talking about the tournament in general, right? I love the concept. I think people, when it actually starts happening, people will like it more and more. So as someone who's watched, European football and it pains me to say European football, but I get it. The fun part of it is like if your team's out of the way it's fun in our competitions, if your team's out of the league, which is the NBA regular season, right? If you're not in the race for first place, then it starts. Some teams are fighting for European position or whatever, but that's not really I guess for the NBA that's the playoffs. But it reaches a point where it gets dull. It gets dull because your team's not fighting for anything, and then so you're watching, but it's just watching for watching. There's no overall goal anymore, and that's the fun. And those clubs that are out are out of contention in the league, but are still in the cup. Those are games that fans really look forward to because they're fighting for something. I think this can be exactly the same thing, and I think the NBA did a really good job in making it so. It stats-wise and legacy-wise and those types of things, it affects as little of the league as possible, because they're still just regular season games. There's no extra games, so there's no extra workload. The NBA seasons are still going to be 82 games, so legacy-wise, when you're comparing eras, it's still easier to compare. It's still just as easy to compare because it's the same amount of games. If you bumped it up to 92 games, then there would be some all-time historic consequences to that. There's only one extra game, which is the actual championship game, I think, right?
Yeah, and that's the only one that doesn't count towards the 82 game record.
Exactly, and so the the one game that they have extra, that would be the 80-30, and doesn't count stats wise for whatever your for whatever your season average is. So it's basically like it's kind of like a friendly, I would say, but with it culminates in a friendly for some money for the players. I think it's really interesting, and the Rockets, there's a possibility that the Rockets are not fighting for the play-in. Hopefully they are, but there's a chance they're not. And I think this makes more of it count. And I'll just say, shame on you if you don't watch the NBA until Christmas, because if you only start at Christmas, and knowing that by the last 10 games of the season are basically all garbage because nobody's like,
right,
the teams are tanking, and it's kind of bullshit the win to get in the losses you get. I mean, my favorite part of the NBA is the beginning of the season, seeing what teams shape into what's the new pecking order in the NBA. I think that's really fun. But that was just tangent.
Yeah, and that's certainly not listeners to this podcast by any means. But I think especially in America, where American football is king, then it takes people until a bit deeper, at least on a national scale, to truly start talking about the NBA. And it's just, again, it's a creative way for the NBA. I just don't see any downside. If it doesn't work out, who really cares? It's still counting towards the 82 games, and you can always pivot back. But maybe this takes off. Maybe it gives hope to fans in more markets. Maybe it gives talk radio shows around the country more to talk about in October and November and December. Maybe the extra tickets you sell from that Final Four in Las Vegas when you get to the knockout stage can really do something in terms of your revenue, and it can grow your brand in Las Vegas before the NBA actually has a full-on franchise there. There's only positives from this. I don't see negatives. Is there a guarantee it's going to work out? No, but I just don't see any reason for fans to be bothered by it. It's something that the NBA, they want to try, because clearly you want to have as much revenue as you can. That's how you can keep this thing growing and make the game as attractive as it can possibly be. You need more money. This is a way to make that happen, and hopefully it works out. The last thing I want to touch on before we close out. So Jonathan Fagan just put out an article in the Chronicle. It's going to be in Sunday's paper. It's an interview with Rafael Stone, who can now talk about the deals that he made in the first weekend of free agency because they're now official. I'm going to skip what he said about Jock Landale and Jeff Green, veterans who they like. Well, in the case of Green, the veteran. Landale, I know he's just in his third year, but he is 27. They've tracked his career internationally. They like his presence. They like how he plays, yada, yada. And, of course, as far as the guys like Usman Garuba and Ty Washington, he's not going to come out and say what we now pretty much know to be the case, that Brook Lopez more or less told the Rockets he was coming and backed out, and that's why they did some of those cap clearing moves. No, he's going to say, and he framed it as, look, they didn't have playing time for guys like Usman and Ty anyway, so now it's a win-win. They can get opportunities to play somewhere else and perhaps take their career to a level that it wouldn't have reached in Houston. I don't think that's entirely accurate, but what else can he really say? To me, the more interesting quotes from Rafael were on Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks, and I'm going to read you, scrolling up to try and get to it now. Talking about Fred, I think he's a little unique in that obviously he's a very good offensive player to help get the team organized, make sure everybody's where they're supposed to be. But he's also someone that has really flourished off the ball, is a really talented three-point shooter, and someone who has been truly excellent defensively. With Fred, we feel like we're lucky we get somebody that really has a bunch of strengths and no weaknesses. To me, this goes back into, and we talked about this in May and June, and ultimately they came to the conclusion that as far as blending with Amin Thompson, it's easier to do with Fred VanVleet than with James Harden, because with Harden, there's the questions of how he succeeds off the ball, as opposed to if Amin is ready, and we spent a lot of this podcast talking about how great he looked, if he's ready sooner rather than later, then you can still have a lot of value from Fred playing off the ball in a way that maybe you couldn't with James. And so I think it explains that thought process, even if, of course, he's not going to use James's actual name since he's still under contract with another team. Then talking about Dillon Brooks, from our perspective, his body of work is something we paid attention to and thought highly of. He has consistently guarded the opposing team's best player and has done as good a job as possible. Second team all defense last year. That's me talking about Rafael. To get back to Rafael's quote, that's obviously a very valuable trait, and the teams he were on were very good defensively, and he was a huge part of it. I think there were a lot of people in the first 24 to 36 hours of free agency that pointed to Dillon getting 4 years and $80 million, and then Bruce Brown getting what amounted to a 1 year, $23 million bloat, and then the team option after that. Look, a lot of it just came down to the fact that from the Rockets' perspective, besides Brooks being a little bit bigger, I think what they like with him, and I think this appealed not just to Rafael, but to Ime Udoka as well, is that he has been the guy for a number of years tasked with guarding the opposing team's best player. And there's warts that come from that. Obviously, he's had some lowlights from time to time, including the back and forth he had with LeBron during that playoff series between the Grizzlies and the Lakers. Everybody knows that. The flip side, though, is that you have actually seen him provide value in those settings, as opposed to someone like a Bruce Brown. Look, I know he played an integral role for the Nuggets, and he was a good role player for the Nets the couple of years before that. He was also largely coming off the bench, going up against second teamers where you can pick and choose the matchups a little bit more. And so it's very easy to try and extrapolate guys from smaller roles and say, well, if we just put them in this bigger role, then they're going to be able to handle it. Everything's going to translate just as you would hope. And maybe it does, but there is some risk. As opposed to with Dylan, I think Rafael hit the nail on the head as far as their thinking that he has consistently guarded the opposing team's best player. And that's something that's happened for years. And that is something that is legitimately a plus in the Dylan Brooks column. Am I saying that it outweighs everything else to where it's clearly a slam dunk to give him a $20 million a year deal the way the Rockets did for 4 years, even though he is just 27, so conceivably he could age well? No, I'm not saying it's a lock. You can make legitimate arguments against it from a value perspective. I'm just saying there's at least a defensible argument you can make about Brooks in terms of the value of him having proven what he does as a guy for years in Memphis guarding the opposing team's best perimeter player on, again, a legitimate contender in the West the last couple of years. There is value in that certainty. It is a higher floor, which is something we know the Rockets prioritize going into this offseason. And then similarly with Fred, again, I'm not going to say that it was a slam dunk decision. No, I've made the case for James Harden plenty of times on this podcast. I'm not saying I know it was right. I don't. But I will say that I respect the logic that went into it. And I can understand that because he's sort of, again, it sort of ties back into what we were saying earlier about Ari and to an extent Amin. The Rockets have brought in guys. I think it's very useful when you look at some of the young players they already had in place that can provide value in a lot of different ways. And I think with Fred, unlike James, there isn't just one way that you have to play. There's multiple ways that you can potentially still get a lot of value in him, and he can fit in a lot of different constructs. And so ultimately that's what the Rockets decided. And we had largely, came to those conclusions when we discussed it amongst ourselves, but it's nice to have Rafael actually say it on the record as well. And so my thought on it, I'm not going to guarantee our listeners that's going to work out. Obviously, I don't know that. But what I can say is that the process is sound. It makes sense. And I think Ime Udoka had a big role as well. And you spend that kind of money to bring in that type of coach, you have to let him implement his vision. And he has a certain say in personnel. These were guys he wanted. And now it's what you said earlier. You let it play out. And, there's accountability if it doesn't work out. But right now, they got, for the most part, who they wanted. I don't see why you wouldn't give them the benefit of the doubt. And when I hear those quotes, to me, the logic is sound. Is there anything I'm missing?
Yeah, I kind of understand. I never had approached it from that perspective, especially in the Dylan Brooks stuff. It does make sense, right? Dylan Brooks, if you're focusing on what a guy does at an elite level, that's 100% certain to translate into his next team. Dylan Brooks' defense compared to any other guy's anything in free agency is by far the most certain thing. So if you're targeting someone that you know is going to give you something, Dylan Brooks's defense is something that will translate 100%. Right? And I can understand if you're going after a guy like Bruce Brown, you're kind of hoping that a lot of the stuff that he did on small volume can be done at a higher volume on this team. And I kind of understand that you're going to dramatically change whatever the situation is for Bruce Brown and his previous teams versus this team because of the offensive talent that he always had around him. So I'm trying to understand it, right? I do. I can understand the logic they went for. I'm still not sure if I agree he's the better player, just because I wonder what conversations went on behind the scenes as far as shot selection. We know there are incentives. I think a very telling part of how this is going to go is what are those incentives based on? Did they get him to agree to incentives based on percentage, like shooting percentages, like 3-point percentage? Because if they did,
interesting when that comes out.
Because if they did, even if it might not mean everything, but it means at the very least that he's aware that that's something that they want him to correct and that he's open to correcting because he was open to making that a bonus. Right? It could be he could have pushed for team-based bonuses like wins or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see how that's going to go, because most of my problem with Dillon Brooks is shot selection, right? I think he's actually a fine shooter. He's a 34, I think he shot 32% last year, but he's a 34% shooter. He had a couple of seasons at above 37%. So to me, it's mostly shot selection, right? And then if you took away the shot selection issues, I think he's easily a better player than Bruce Brown and any other of the candidates available. The question will always be, while you factor in what Rafael said, I think it makes sense that there's something guaranteed to pan out with Dillon Brooks that he's going to give you no matter what. I wonder how they factor in the potential downsides as far as shot selection, which are not a concern with Bruce Brown, right? So I think Dillon Brooks is a more it's interesting because he's both a more volatile signing because of how it can go as far as shot selection goes, but at the same time he's also a safer signing because there is at least one skill set you're guaranteed that's going to translate to your team. So I've never put that much thought into it as far. I was just judging them as players, right, and then how they would fit our team. Never. It's interesting when GMs peel back the curtain a little bit and kind of show a little bit of the process that goes into picking which guy they're going after.
Yeah. And again, I think you laid out a compelling counter argument, at least to an extent. It's not so much that you're saying that he's right or wrong. I'm just trying to present his argument. And in this case, I think it's sound. I think it's fair. Just because I think it's fair doesn't mean I think it's right or that you can't make a counter argument. No, you absolutely can. It's just saying, look, this is what the thought process was. It makes some sense. But as with most things, it's not like there's just one clearly right way and the other is wrong. No, there's usually multiple compelling arguments when you're talking about how to do something as nuanced as building a championship basketball team. There's lots of different paths that you can take. And now they peel back the curtain a little bit. I can understand the thought process that went into it. Doesn't guarantee that these are the right decisions. But I do think it's at least nice to have some transparency and to try to get fans on board with the process so that they can understand exactly what went into it, that it wasn't just something that they did willy-nilly. They were desperate for certain guys. No, there was a thought process that even if we have some misgivings, it went into it. There's some very legitimate analysis that went on behind the scenes, and ultimately they came to the conclusion that these are the guys they wanted. And now, as you said earlier, we just have to wait and see as to whether it works out. One final thing before we close out the podcast that I want to touch on. So I'm sure some people listening to us just glow about Jabari Smith Jr. and Amin Thompson and Tari Easton and how great they looked. We'll probably listen and say, well, why do the Rockets need a heroic buzzer beater with 0.6 seconds left to win that game? And some of it, again, in fairness to Portland, the Blazers had a pretty stacked summer team as well with Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe. But I think another component to it, this Rockets Summer League team is very top heavy. And there's a reason for that. Once you get past those initial big names, and we should point out, by the way, Darius Days, who's probably the most intriguing prospect the Rockets have as far as guys that were with the Vipers. He was on a two-way last year. He's still on a two-way. I personally find him a lot more interesting than Trevor Hudgens. He was out sick for Friday's game. Hopefully he's able to return for Sunday. If not for Sunday, I suspect definitely by the middle part of the week for those last three games. Other than the recent first-round picks, Darius Days, and I suppose we can throw Trevor Hudgens into the mix as well because he is on a two-way with the team at this time, there's a lot of big question marks. And guys that for the most part our listeners have never heard of. And there's a reason for that. Because the last couple of years, the Rockets have been so deep in terms of young prospects, they haven't had the roster spots. And on the few occasions that they did, they weren't exactly a preferred destination for undrafted free agents because there's so many young guys already in place that they would be competing with for minutes. One potential benefit to offloading these guys like Usman Garuba, Josh Christopher, Ty Washington, all these consolidation moves that we've talked about. Now, all of a sudden, there is a path to where the Rockets conceivably could get in the game for younger players again, as far as filling out the final spots of their roster, perhaps with the Vipers. And in that Fagan article in the Houston Chronicle I referenced earlier, there's a note that Houston plans to add one or two young prospects, possibly not until after training camp. There's a couple of windows for that. Number one, the Rockets are second on the waiver wire behind only Detroit. They had the second worst record in the league last year, so they can claim guys that are part of roster cuts. And they could also, along the same lines, trade for them during the preseason as teams around the league get ready for having to cull their rosters from the 20 they can have entering training camp during the offseason to the 15 plus 3 two-way slots that you can have for the regular season. So there are going to be guys open up. And so I think that's something that, number one, you should keep in mind over the next week, especially without Thompson. If things start to look ugly, well, there's a reason for that. Again, the Rockets have less organizational depth in terms of young players, the types of guys that often fill out these summer league rosters. The Rockets don't have nearly as many of them as many other teams, simply because of the way they've been constructed. A lot of the young guys that might have played otherwise, well, now they just got traded in the past week, so they're not options anymore for the summer league. Guys that otherwise would have been playing, most likely. Certainly Ty Washington and maybe Usman Garuba and Josh Christopher entering their third seasons and being relatively unproven as well. Well, now they're no longer here. So number one, I will say that's why I think it would not surprise me if things don't go well from a team perspective. That's why the game against the Blazers, a big part of it, in my opinion, that it was so close despite having the individual brilliance. Again, this Rockets roster is very top heavy. You have some big names that played really, really well, but then you are going to have those. Well, I think at some point it's likely that Jabari Smith and Tari Eason are going to shut down as well. And now you take away Thompson, all of a sudden that roster is going to get hairy. And even just in the game that they played last night, the minutes in particular that Amin weren't out there, they just seemed a lot more disorganized without that engine to run the show. And so that's why I'm a little skeptical about how this is going to play out. So I would say keep that in mind in the short term when you're evaluating the next couple of weeks. There's a reason why the Rockets, even with those glowing performances in game one, had the game that close, because it's a very top heavy roster. It gets questionable. But the upside is that because of that, there is going to be an opening for the Rockets to add to that prospect stockpile over the next few months. It may take, the line from Fagan about after training camp makes the most sense, because a lot of teams aren't going to make moves on their young guys until they have to. They're going to want to see how they perform in camp and try and, keep the guys that are the most promising. But yeah, there are going to be some opportunities, and Houston is going to be much more desirable because you don't have guys like Usman Garuba, Josh Christopher, and Ty Washington already in place. So I think that's one silver lining to keep in mind in terms of roster building, is that you may have a window in a few weeks or months to get a couple of young guys to sort of replenish that stockpile of guys that are, I guess, a combination of end of your bench / assuming health Rio Grande Valley Vipers during the coming season. So just keep that perspective in mind as we go through the rest of the offseason and leading into training camp. The Rockets do have an opening with these recent moves to add to their roster with young players, and I fully expect Rafael Stone to take advantage of that at some point. Anyway, with that, we will bring this episode to a close. Wait. Go ahead.
Maybe they can, with the Thunder having 21 guys on the roster right now, maybe they could get one of those, maybe Ty Washington or Usman Garuba through the waiver wire.
That would be hilarious.
At the end of training camp. But and just as a quick note for those who don't know, the Rockets can, there is a rule that you can get players back that you traded away. But if they switch teams one more time after you trade, so basically
you can.
The spirit of the rule is that they're trying to stop people from salary dumping and then having the other team waive the guy and going back and getting him for the minimum, right? Yeah. But if you trade the guy, like the Rockets traded to Atlanta, and then Atlanta trades them to OKC, now
in their own dump.
Yeah, you're not exploiting anything, and so if they get waived, the Rockets can claim them, and they could even trade for them if they wanted to. So just a heads up, it could end up being a really funny scenario where one of those guys eventually slips through the cracks, because especially Ty. OKC has like 4 point guards. They have Giddey, Shea, Jalen Williams.
They have 21 players on their roster in total. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
They just drafted Cason Wallace. Like they're not in the market for more guards. He's I think they even have, is it Isaiah Joe, if I'm not mistaken, or something like that. So it's.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's really crowded.
It's possible.
He's gonna get waived or traded or waived. I don't think. I don't think anything like one. At least I think either trade him away or waive him. They're not gonna spend 5 roster spots or 6 roster spots on point guards.
Yeah. The one incredibly limited silver lining I will throw out there, because Atlanta, for those who did not see it, traded Garuba and Ty to Oklahoma City along with a second-round pick to dump them. That would seemingly confirm that yes, those two players did not have positive trade value when Rafael Stone traded them to the Hawks a week earlier. Now, again, the Rockets are ultimately responsible, and we said this in our last episode, because they're the ones that drafted Garuba and Taitei in the first round in 2021 and 2022. So even if they don't have value, then okay, it says the Rockets whiffed on those picks, and maybe prioritizing guys like Daishen Nix and Bruno Fernando ahead of them for minutes played a part in their development being stalled, or at least their perceived development. All of that is fair. But at least with this deal, with Atlanta canvassing the league over a week, and at this point, they don't have the time pressure. Part of the reason the Rockets had to pay a slight premium is if you want to do these deals on day one of free agency, there's opportunity cost for the guys that are taking your salary dumps. So there's a bit of a premium, as opposed to now the first wave of free agency is over. And so there's less of an opportunity cost to the team taking the salary dump, in this case, Oklahoma City. The fact that after a week of canvassing the league, there not being that time pressure, and the Hawks still had to pay a premium to offload Garuba and Taitei, it tells you that at least now, it's not like Rafael Stone paid a price treating them as negative assets when in reality they're positive ones. No, for whatever the reason, those guys are not positive value assets on their current contracts on the marketplace. It just is what it is. That's not to say that every decision is right. No, again, even if they are negative assets, and even if they end up being terrible NBA players and nothing becomes of them, then okay, the Rockets drafted them with first round picks, and they could have done better. In the case of Garuba, they could have drafted Quentin Grimes. Same applies to Josh Christopher. Those were back-to-back at 23 and 24, and then Quentin Grimes, who's turned into a valuable 3-and-D type piece for the Knicks, he was at 25, and he's out of your own backyard, the University of Houston. That's absolutely fair to say. I'm just saying, strictly from the perspective of July 2023, those guys clearly did not have positive trade value at this time. So at least for that part of it, there can be a small silver lining that it's not like Rafael badly misjudged their marketplace value at this time. Atlanta making this deal a week later would seem to make it pretty clear that their value right now just isn't good. That's the reality. Anyway, with that, we will put a bow on this episode. For Paulo, I'm Ben. If you want more from us before our next show, the best way to get it is on Twitter. I'm on there at Ben DuBose. Paulo is on there at Paulo Alves NBA. And the show, The Logger Line, is on there at The Logger Line. If you go there, you can find our link tree where it has links to Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790, Rockets Wire, along with Apple, Google, Spotify, all of our distributors. So again, you want to find out where to listen to this podcast, or you want to support our sponsors and partners, you can access all of the links, content, and information simply by going to the link tree that's available through our Twitter page at The Logger Line, which, unlike last week, I can confidently say will be up for the foreseeable future. Funny how Twitter seems to have sorted out its issues now that there's a new competitor on the block named Threads. Anyway, with that, I'll get off my soapbox. Again, for Paulo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.